Gregory Peck, a Hollywood legend known for his commanding presence, deep voice, and unwavering integrity on screen. From To Kill a Mockingbird to Roman Holiday, he embodied characters who stood for justice, honor, and compassion. But behind his seemingly perfect life, Peck faced heartbreaking tragedies that shaped him as a man. From a painful childhood to the devastating loss of his son, his journey was filled with sorrow, resilience, and an unshakable commitment to his values. Today we take a closer look at the triumphs and tragedies of Gregory Peck, a man whose legacy extends far beyond the silver screen. Born on April 5, 1916, in a coastal neighborhood of San Diego, California, Peck's childhood was far from the idyllic life one might imagine for a future Hollywood icon. His parents, Bernice and Gregory Peck Sr., were deeply incompatible, and their marriage was tumultuous from the start. When young Gregory was just 5 years old, their relationship finally collapsed, and he watched as his family fell apart. The divorce itself was painful, but what followed was even more devastating. When Peck's parents separated, they made a shocking and heartbreaking decision. They both chose to walk away from raising their son. Neither his mother nor his father wanted full custody, leaving him without a stable home. It remains unclear why they abandoned him, but it was his paternal grandmother, Kate Ayers, who ultimately stepped in to take care of him. Despite the rejection, Peck carried no resentment toward his parents. Later in life, if anything, the hardship made him more resilient, shaping him into the man he would become. Kate Ayers did her best to provide young Gregory with a sense of stability, though how well she filled the role of a parent remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that she introduced him to something that would change his life forever: movies. Every week she would dress him up and take him to the local theater, exposing him to the magic of film. It became their weekly ritual, one that Peck enjoyed immensely, even if he didn't yet realize that cinema would one day become his calling. But not every trip to the movies was a joyful experience. When Peck was 9 years old, his grandmother took him to see The Phantom of the Opera. The grotesque imagery and eerie atmosphere terrified him. That night, haunted by the film's disturbing scenes, he did something he would later find deeply embarrassing. He climbed into bed with his grandmother for comfort. Though it was an innocent reaction for a child, it may have confirmed his parents' worst fears. Perhaps word of his fright reached them and fueled concerns that their son was growing up too soft. Whatever the case, they soon made a drastic decision. Just as Peck was settling into life with his grandmother, his world was turned upside down once again. At the age of 10, he was pulled from the only home he had ever known and sent to a Catholic military academy. The carefree days of weekly movie outings were over, replaced by strict discipline, rigorous training, and an entirely different way of life. Gregory Peck reluctantly left for cadet school, kissing his grandmother goodbye before stepping into an unfamiliar and rigid new world. Tragically, he would never see her again. While he was away, she passed away, leaving him completely alone. With no one else to care for him, his parents had no choice but to step back into his life. At least one of them did. In a matter of moments, his world had been turned upside down, and the sense of security he had known with his grandmother was gone forever. But this was just the beginning of the challenges he would face. Now living with his father, Peck enrolled at San Diego High School, trying to find his footing in a life that still felt unsettled. In 1934, he transferred to a teacher's college, and it was there that he stumbled upon something that sparked real passion: acting. He enrolled in theater and public speaking courses and quickly discovered a deep love for the stage. But while he thrived in the theater, his studies and education left him uninspired. Peck knew he needed a change, but instead of committing fully to acting, he made an unexpected decision that took him down a very different path. Rather than pursuing theater, Peck chose to study medicine, believing it to be a more practical career choice. But as history would prove, he was never meant to be a doctor. He enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, where tuition at the time was just $26 a year, an amount that still proved difficult for him to afford. Struggling financially, he needed a way to make ends meet, and the job he found raised more than a few eyebrows. To support himself, Peck took on work as a hasher, a kitchen helper responsible for preparing and serving meals. While the job itself wasn't particularly scandalous, the location certainly was. He worked at the Gamma Phi Beta sorority house. The sight of a tall 6'3" athlete from the rowing team flipping pancakes for breakfast was quite the spectacle, and the sorority sisters were more than a little intrigued. But it wasn't just his presence that caught their attention, it was his voice. Deep, smooth, and rich as honey, his voice made quite the impression. Peck's commanding presence and naturally warm voice didn't go unnoticed for long. One of his acting coaches recognized his potential and encouraged him to shift his focus away from medicine and toward the stage. For the first time, Peck saw what had been obvious all along. Acting was his true calling. Fully embracing this new direction, he began appearing in plays, performing in 5 productions during his senior year alone. Years later, he would look back at his time at Berkeley as the best years of my life. Gregory Peck was certain he was ready to leave Berkeley behind and chase his dreams. But there was just one problem. He was still one course shy of graduating. Impatient and eager to move forward, he made a bold, if reckless, decision. Rather than staying to earn his degree, he left college behind and set his sights on Broadway. For the first time in his life, there was no doubt about what he wanted to do. With nothing but ambition and determination, he packed his bags and headed to New York City, ready to carve out a future on the stage. Upon arriving, he enrolled in expensive acting classes at the prestigious neighborhood playhouse, where he trained under legendary coach Sanford Meisner. But while he was studying in a playhouse, his living situation was far less glamorous. With little money and no real connections, Peck often struggled just to find a place to sleep. At times, he was completely homeless, spending nights on park benches in Central Park. It was a harsh introduction to life as a struggling actor, and as much as he loved the craft, passion alone wasn't enough to pay the bills. To make ends meet and keep himself off the streets, Peck took on a string of odd jobs. One of his first gigs was at the 1939 World's Fair, where he worked as a barker, the fast-talking showman who lures in crowds to buy tickets for attractions. Later, he became a page at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, leading tours of the famous building and its sister venue, Radio City Music Hall. None of these jobs were glamorous, but they kept him afloat as he waited for his big break. Finally, in December 1941, his persistence paid off. He landed his first major stage role in a production of George Bernard Shaw's The Doctor's Dilemma, which opened in San Francisco. It was a huge moment for Peck. He was finally earning a living as an actor and could afford a roof over his head. But just as his career was gaining momentum, history intervened. 1 week after the play's opening, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, plunging the United States into World War II. Suddenly, every young man in the country was expected to serve, including Peck. His dream of becoming an actor was now at risk as military enlistment became a near certainty. Would this be the abrupt end of his career just as it was beginning? As it turned out, fate had other plans. Peck's towering 6'3" frame may have made him seem like the perfect soldier, but a past injury saved him from the draft. While training in acting school, he had severely injured his back during a rigorous dance class. Though the injury didn't stop him from performing, it was enough to disqualify him from military service. The Army had no use for him, but Broadway certainly did. With so many young men drafted into World War II, Hollywood and the theater world faced a shortage of male actors. Gregory Peck seized the opportunity, throwing himself into work like never before. During the war years, he appeared in 50 stage productions, including 3 on Broadway. He also toured the country, performing in summer stock and road productions. While the war was a global catastrophe, it inadvertently provided Peck with the perfect conditions to build his stage career. But acting wasn't the only area where the lack of men worked in his favor. With so many soldiers overseas, Peck had little competition when it came to romance. After some time searching for the right partner, he found himself drawn to Greta Kukkonen, a Finnish businesswoman known for her intelligence and striking beauty. There was just one unusual detail. She was 5 years older than him, a minor scandal by the era's standards. Despite the age gap, the two married in 1942 and went on to have 3 sons together. However, the war's impact on Peck's life wasn't limited to his personal relationships. It also accelerated his transition to film. By 1944, Peck was ready to make the leap from stage to screen. His first major film, Days of Glory, was ironically set during the World War II, despite the fact that he had never served. While he was no stranger to acting, film was an entirely new world for him. Years of stage training had taught him to project his voice and exaggerate his expressions for the audience. But film acting required a more natural approach. The director quickly realized that Peck needed to unlearn certain theatrical habits, spending extra time coaching him to tone down his performance for the camera. But even with this adjustment, the critical reception was far from glowing. Reviews for Days of Glory were lukewarm at best, and Peck in particular took a hit. The New York Times delivered one of the harshest critiques, calling his performance stiff and lacking emotion. Despite this rocky start, Hollywood producers weren't ready to write him off, mainly because they had so few leading men available. Studios were eager to sign him, but while other actors might have jumped at a long-term contract, Peck had other plans. Unlike most stars of the era who were bound to a single studio's projects, Peck rejected the traditional Hollywood system. Instead of committing to one company, he took the unprecedented step of signing deals with 4 different studios, ensuring he had the freedom to choose his roles. It was an unheard of move at the time, one that allowed him to build a career on his own terms. And while he now had his pick of films, the role that would define him for a lifetime was just around the corner. If Gregory Peck wanted to prove himself as a serious actor, he couldn't have chosen a more challenging role. In The Keys of the Kingdom, 1944, he played a priest who had to age from his 20s to his 80s, appearing in nearly every scene. It was an ambitious project, and Peck needed it to be a success. But taking on such a demanding role so early in his career was a huge gamble. Unfortunately, the film itself didn't generate the reaction he had hoped for. Critics found The Keys of the Kingdom overly long and slow, with too much dialogue and not enough dramatic tension. To make matters worse, it struggled at the box office, raising concerns about whether Peck's career might be in trouble. But in an unexpected turn, his performance was universally praised. Despite the film's shortcomings, Peck's acting stood out, earning him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The executives at 20th Century Fox were thrilled. They had found their next big star and were determined to make the public fall in love with him. Of course, with fame came curiosity. Peck had captured the attention of moviegoers, and they wanted to know more about him. One question loomed larger than the rest. Why wasn't he serving in World War II? With the war still raging, most young men in Hollywood had been drafted or enlisted, yet Peck remained stateside. The real reason that he had suffered a back injury during a modern dance class was not exactly the image 20th Century Fox wanted to project. Determined to maintain his status as a leading man, the studio did what Hollywood did best. They rewrote the narrative. Instead of revealing the true cause of his injury, they scoured his past and found a more acceptable explanation. They claimed that he had hurt his back during rowing practice, a story that fit perfectly with the rugged masculine persona they were crafting for him. With that, his reputation remained intact, and audiences saw him as the embodiment of strength and dignity. Peck's career was now in full swing, and he became increasingly selective about his roles. In 1945, he made a bold move by choosing to work with one of the greatest directors of all time, Alfred Hitchcock. The film was Spellbound, a psychological thriller that paired him with the stunning and talented Ingrid Bergman. It was a high-profile project and a major opportunity for Peck. But there was just one problem. While he had chosen to work with Hitchcock, Hitchcock wasn't exactly thrilled about working with him. On the set of Spellbound, Gregory Peck quickly sensed that something was off. Alfred Hitchcock, known for his intense directing style, kept his interactions with Peck strictly professional but noticeably cold. While the two maintained a cordial working relationship, there was an undeniable distance between them. Peck, still relatively new to Hollywood, felt the strain. The lack of warmth from one of the industry's most respected directors chipped away at his confidence. It wasn't until much later that he discovered the real reason behind Hitchcock's behavior. And it wasn't something he wanted to hear. As it turned out, Hitchcock never wanted Peck in the film to begin with. His first choice for the role had been Cary Grant, a more established star at the time. When Grant turned it down, the studio insisted on Peck, leaving Hitchcock resentful and unwilling to fully embrace his leading man. Working with a director who didn't want him in the first place made for a challenging experience, but Peck found an ally in his co-star, Ingrid Bergman. Despite the tension behind the scenes, Spellbound was destined to be a game-changer for Peck's career. During test screenings, producer David O. Selznick noticed something unusual. Whenever Peck appeared on screen, women in the audience couldn't stop whispering to each other. Their hushed excitement became so distracting that male audience members had to shush them. Clearly, Peck wasn't just making an impression. He was causing a stir. But what Selznick discovered next was even more surprising. At subsequent screenings, Selznick realized that the female audience didn't just react when Peck first appeared on screen. They started whispering the moment his name appeared in the opening credits. His presence alone was enough to send them into a frenzy. While Spellbound received 6 Academy Award nominations and was celebrated for its suspenseful storytelling, it was Peck's undeniable on-screen allure that became one of the film's biggest talking points. With this newfound awareness of his effect on audiences, Peck did what any rising star would do. He used it to his advantage. His leading man status was now undeniable, and the studios knew it too. But while his public image remained that of the perfect gentleman, behind the scenes, he had been hiding a shocking secret. In 1945, at the height of his rising fame, Peck became involved in an affair, one that he kept under wraps for years. The most scandalous part? He was a married man at the time. Hollywood had always presented Gregory Peck as the ultimate example of dignity and integrity. But eventually the truth about his infidelity would come to light, exposing a side of him the world had never seen before. On the set of Spellbound in 1945, Gregory Peck found himself completely captivated by Ingrid Bergman. The chemistry they shared on screen extended beyond the cameras, leading to an intense but secret affair. Peck kept quiet about it for decades, only revealing the truth 5 years after Bergman had passed away. In a rare moment of openness during an interview, he admitted, "All I can say is that I had real love for her, and I think that's where I ought to stop. I was young. She was young. We were involved for weeks in close and intense work." Following Spellbound, Peck took a sharp turn in his career. After starring in the wholesome family drama The Yearling, he opted for something much more provocative, Duel in the Sun, 1946, a Western so steamy that it quickly earned the nickname Lust in the Dust. With its overtly passionate and morally ambiguous themes, the film scandalized audiences and critics alike. Some cities even banned it outright, fearing its provocative nature would corrupt the public. At the time, this kind of controversy could easily destroy an actor's reputation. But what Peck did next was even riskier. He took a public stance that could have ended his career altogether. In the post-World War II era, fear of communism spread through Hollywood, leading to the formation of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. The committee launched an aggressive hunt for suspected communists within the film industry, blacklisting those who refused to cooperate. Many actors and filmmakers scrambled to protect themselves, but Peck took a different approach. Believing the committee's actions were un-American, he boldly signed a controversial letter condemning their tactics. In an era where defying the government could mean the end of a career, his stance was a remarkable act of defiance. Having taken on the political witch hunt, Peck was ready for another bold move, tackling one of the most pressing social issues of the time. In Gentleman's Agreement, 1947, he played a journalist who poses as a Jewish man to experience firsthand the discrimination and prejudice that existed in America. The film was groundbreaking, shedding light on the deep-seated anti-Semitism that many preferred to ignore. It received 8 Academy Award nominations, including a Best Actor nod for Peck. By taking on the role, he cemented his place not just as a Hollywood heartthrob, but as an actor willing to challenge societal norms through his work. However, despite his commitment to justice and activism, Peck wasn't above playing roles that contradicted his personal beliefs. After vocally opposing the communist blacklist, he made a surprising choice. He played a Russian in The Great Sinner, 1949, a film about gambling starring Ava Gardner. While the role may have seemed like a contradiction, the project gave him something far more valuable, a lifelong friendship. He and Gardner hit it off immediately, forming a bond that lasted decades. Later in life, he would even describe her as his favorite co-star. But when Gardner passed away in 1990, Peck responded in a way that left many people puzzled. His reaction to her death was unexpected, and it left those closest to him wondering what was truly going on beneath his composed exterior. Gregory Peck eventually stepped into the world of comedy, but his first major attempt at the genre didn't come easily. In 1953, he starred in Roman Holiday, a film that had a lot riding on it, not for him, but for its young leading lady Audrey Hepburn. It was her first major role, and it was clear from the start that this was going to be the film that made her a star. In fact, the role was so clearly written to highlight Hepburn that Cary Grant had turned it down, unwilling to play what was essentially a supporting part. Peck, however, had no such ego. He had no problem playing opposite Hepburn, but he did have something to say about the way she was being credited. Realizing that Roman Holiday would launch Hepburn into stardom, Peck made a request to ensure she got the recognition she deserved. Initially, promotional posters had his name in large letters above the title, while Hepburn's name was much smaller and placed below. Peck later admitted that he told his agent, "I'm smart enough to know this girl's going to win the Oscar in her first picture, and I'm going to look like a damn fool if her name is not up there on top with mine." He made sure her name was featured more prominently, though he still kept his own on top, After all, even a gentleman had his limits. After Roman holiday, Peck took a break, but it wasn't for leisure. The U.S. had recently introduced higher tax rates for top earners, and Peck, like many actors, looked for ways to reduce what he owed. He discovered that if he spent extended periods working overseas, he could significantly lower his tax bill. So he took advantage of the loophole, filming movies in the UK, Germany, and Sri Lanka. While it wasn't exactly a vacation, it was definitely a holiday from high taxes. Peck's time abroad helped cement his international reputation. In 1954, the UK recognized outstanding performances with a special award category for non-British actors, and Peck was nominated. When the results were announced, however, he received an unpleasant surprise. He hadn't won. In fact, he hadn't even come in second. He finished in third place, a disappointing outcome for someone who was used to being at the top. But while he didn't take home the award, his time overseas would soon bring him a far more meaningful prize. Back in 1952, during a trip to France, Peck had met Veronique Pisani, a French journalist who had been assigned to interview him. Though their meeting had been brief, she had left quite an impression. At the time, Peck was going through a separation from his first wife, but once his marriage was officially over, he wasted no time. 6 months later, he invited Pisani to lunch, and their connection quickly deepened. Peck didn't believe in waiting when he knew what he wanted. The very day after finalizing his divorce, he and Pisani were married. He brought her back to the United States, and the two remained together for the rest of his life. A love story that endured far longer than any of his Hollywood romances. When Gregory Peck returned to Hollywood, he took on a role that tested his dramatic range in The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, 1956. Starring alongside his Duel in the Sun co-star Jennifer Jones, he expected a smooth collaboration. Instead, he found himself facing unexpected hostility. During their on-screen arguments, Jones repeatedly clawed at his face with such aggression that Peck eventually complained to the director. Frustrated, he reportedly said, "I don't call that acting, I call it personal." If Peck was looking for a physically demanding role, he certainly found it in Moby Dick, 1956. Director John Huston had to convince him to take on the part of Captain Ahab, the vengeful sea captain obsessed with hunting down a massive whale. The production was grueling, and Peck nearly drowned twice during filming. But surviving the dangerous shoot was only half the battle. Once the film was released, he had to face an entirely different kind of challenge. From the start, Peck had been hesitant to play Ahab, and in the end, his instincts were right. Known for portraying principled, composed characters, Peck had difficulty channeling the unhinged madness that defined Ahab. Critics and audiences expected a performance brimming with passion and obsession. After all, what sane man would seek revenge on a whale? Instead, Peck's restrained acting style didn't quite fit the role, and Moby Dick became a box office disappointment. But the early 1960s marked a major turning point in his career. He made a powerful comeback with Cape Fear, 1962, a gripping psychological thriller that showcased his versatility. Then came the role that would define him forever, Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962. The film won multiple Academy Awards, and Peck himself took home the Oscar for Best Actor. Years later, the American Film Institute named Atticus Finch the greatest movie hero of the past 100 years. And he did it all without superpowers or a cape. However, landing the role of Atticus Finch wasn't as noble as it seemed. Before signing on, Peck made a demand that some might call self-serving. In Harper Lee's novel, the story is told largely from the perspective of the children, Scout and Jim. But Peck insisted that the film shift its focus to Atticus, ensuring he had more screen time. Naturally, the studio agreed, and the end result was a film that became a cinematic masterpiece, one that arguably was made better by Peck's changes. Outside of Hollywood, Peck was equally unafraid to stand up for what he believed in. He was one of the most outspoken critics of the Vietnam War, a stance that was particularly controversial at the time. While young men across the country were burning their draft cards in protest, Peck publicly called them heroes and even referred to them as patriots. His views didn't sit well with everyone, especially since his own son, Stephen Peck, was serving in Vietnam. It's safe to say that family gatherings may have been a little tense after that, but the worst tragedy of his life was still ahead. In 1975, Peck faced a loss no parent should ever endure. His son Jonathan took his own life. A successful journalist, Jonathan had been struggling with personal and health issues. The pain of his loss was unbearable for Peck, who withdrew from public life and refused to work for 2 years. No Hollywood setback, no critical review, no box office failure could compare to the grief of losing his child. After such heartache, Peck took an unexpected career detour, venturing into the horror genre with The Omen, 1976. The role had originally been offered to Charlton Heston, who turned it down in favor of another project, allowing Peck to step in. Surprisingly, he agreed to take a massive pay cut to star in the film, but he negotiated something far more valuable, a percentage of the box office earnings. Whether by luck or instinct, Peck's gamble paid off. The Omen grossed over $60 million in the U.S. alone, making it one of the biggest hits of the decade. Despite his strong moral compass, Peck wasn't afraid to take a stance that might ruffle a few feathers. He joined forces with Susan Sarandon and Martin Sheen to advocate for stricter gun control laws through Handgun Control, Inc., an organization that directly opposed the National Rifle Association, NRA. However, this put him in an awkward position. His longtime friend Charlton Heston was leading the NRA at the time. Rather than confront the issue head-on, Peck carefully distanced himself, downgrading their relationship from friend to colleague. While Peck remained politically engaged, his personal life was deeply affected by the loss of one of his closest friends, Ava Gardner. The two had shared a bond for over 40 years, and when Gardner passed away in 1990, he was devastated. In his grief, he made an unusual decision. He took in her dog, and even more unexpectedly, her housekeeper. While others might have chosen a keepsake like jewelry or a photograph, Peck's way of honoring Gardner was to care for the things she had cherished. On June 12, 2003, Gregory Peck passed away peacefully at home with his wife by his side. His death was mourned by thousands, and nearly 3,000 people attended his public memorial service. With so many friends, colleagues, and admirers gathering to pay their respects, Gregory Peck was more than just a Hollywood icon. He was a man of principle, a devoted father, and a passionate advocate for justice. His career left us with unforgettable performances, but his personal struggles made him even more admirable. Through all the heartbreak, he remained a symbol of dignity, kindness, and resilience. What are your favorite Gregory Peck moments? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories about legendary stars. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.